Welcome to the Family Beacon podcast from Minnesota Family Counsel with hosts Grace Evans and Moses Brattrud. Stay informed on the top stories on life, family, and religious freedom. Get the facts, stand for truth. Hello, and welcome back to the Family Beacon podcast. My name is Grace Evans. I'm here with Moses Brattrud. We are so excited today. I have to say, we've been living one of the best weeks of our entire lives.
Absolutely.
Truly so exciting, so amazing. Things are going down. I've been sitting on the edge of my seat the entire week, barely been able to sleep, barely been able to do my finals as a student because I'm just so hyped about the future of America right now.
Grace, what are you so hyped about?
Well, here's what I'm hyped about. We have an amazing opportunity to overturn Roe v. Wade. I know, which is what we've been waiting for. I mean, okay, you guys know we've talked about Dobbs v. Jackson on the podcast so much, but recently we got a leak from the Supreme Court, which we will get into that in the rest of this episode and why that's actually problematic that this has been leaked, because this is unprecedented and this should not have been leaked. But it does appear that the Supreme Court may indeed overturn Roe v. Wade. We're going to get into that this episode. We'll be having our attorney, Renee Carlson, on to discuss what this means. She's going to break down exactly what happened. I think it can be hard to know, exactly just what to do with all this information. So she's going to break that down for us. And we'll also be having our amazing Assistant Director of Public Policy, Rebecca Delahunt, on the podcast. And she's just going to give us an update on legislative issues in the Minnesota session over just the last few weeks and what we're looking at. So Moses, big week for us, right?
This is absolutely huge. This is the first time I think that we'll have three people on the podcast at once. So,
yes.
And guys, we provide this for free. So we're gonna do a little jazzy music, and then when we come back, we'll be here with Renee Carlson. She's the General Counsel for our True North Legal Initiative and one of the coolest people alive. So we'll see you soon. Welcome back. We're here now with Renee Carlson, and we are so excited to welcome her. She has been on the podcast before, but I want to give a little brief bio to tell you how awesome she is and how grateful Grace and I are to have her here.
Yes, we love Renee.
We love her. So
it's worth it for the encouragement. Come on this show.
Grace and I do try to be encouraging to our guests. But especially Renee, because Renee is a rock star.
Dynamite.
She's dynamite.
Yes.
So let's do a quick intro. She did her undergrad at UCLA, law degree from the University of St. Thomas. She was assistant county attorney here in Minnesota and 7 years of private practice law before joining us at MFC 2 years ago. Most importantly, however, she's a Blackstone Fellow with Alliance Defending Freedom. In that capacity, you did some work with Professor Teresa Collette at the University of St. Thomas, and you and she had
on the topic of abortion.
On the topic of abortion, and you and she had an amazing collab. Collab sounds like we're talking about music, but you guys submitted an amicus brief together on this Dobbs v. Jackson case, which we will talk about together. So Renee, we are so thankful that you are here joining us to tell people in Minnesota a little bit more about this crazy, unprecedented, historic leak this week.
Right. Glad to be here with you guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think our first question for you, Renee, will just be, I think there's a lot of speculation from people across the country and also here in Minnesota of, is this decision actually settled by the Supreme Court or is this not settled? Can you speak to that at all?
Right. Well, this is just a draft opinion, but I think that we have, grounds to believe that perhaps the majority opinion will be a lot like this opinion. I mean, we can only hope so, but of course it's not settled. This isn't done yet. The justices can change their minds. This is just a draft, but again, I think we feel hopeful by what we've seen so far in this draft.
So there's been people talking back and forth about the arguments that Justice Alito makes in the opinion. I think the consensus seems to be that he's not pulling any punches. Can you tell us a little bit more about the arguments and conclusions reached in the opinion?
Yes, absolutely.
I bet you can.
Yes, I can. It was a 98-page opinion. I think it's about a 30-page appendix there. But really, I think it is actually a reader-friendly opinion. And I would encourage all the listeners to look through it because I think one of the issues that we're seeing now is that people just frankly do not understand the Constitution and never have. And so the reactions that we're seeing now
that is going to be a problem.
Yes, is based on the fact that they just don't understand how we got to this point and how actually the opinion makes a lot of sense. So first, I just want to say I think that the draft was really well written, and I think it's really a great lesson in ordered liberty and the rule of law. And that's actually how Justice Alito starts out the opinion. He just, basically goes into how the court got Roe wrong. And even in cases prior to Roe, saying how they established these fundamental rights and the concept of liberty out of thin air. So they weren't grounded in the court's traditional legal analysis for that. And he really nails down, even what many conservatives and progressives believe about Roe, which is that we don't have any reason to believe that this came from anything in the law, in fact, and that Roe was basically invented and didn't go through the correct legal analysis in the first place. And one of the things that he brings up is that this kind of issue demands that we take a clear look at history. And I just want to read a quote because I think it's really great from the opinion. He says, on occasion, when the court has ignored the appropriate limits imposed by respect for the teachings of history, it has fallen into the free-willing judicial policy-making that characterized discredited decisions such as Lochner versus New York. The court must not fall prey to such an unprincipled approach. Instead, guided by the history and tradition that map the essential components of our nation's concept of ordered liberty, we must ask what the 14th Amendment means by the term liberty. And in that, he concludes that if we apply that inquiry to this case, that there really is no basis for abortion. We don't find that in the 14th Amendment at all.
And I think that's a really good point, Renee. I think our audience really needs to hear that one more time because it's such an important thing. Everyone's looking for this, not everyone, I should say. Progressives keep looking for this right to abortion in the Constitution. They're like, this right is enshrined in the Constitution. Well, I just want to tell these progressives, you should keep looking because it's not there. It ain't there, folks.
Even when it was originally decided, it was like supposed to be in the, what was the phrase, the penumbras and emanations.
Right.
And not in the text itself.
Right.
Just in some
It's
type
mystical,
of metaphysical.
magical, metaphysical something that we just import into the Constitution. Well ahead of their time with technology, right?
Yeah, it's like this mythical right to abortion that's enshrined in the Constitution. It's kind of like the gender unicorn. It's like, it's not actually a thing, but people think it's a thing.
Right.
I don't know. So I think
like
that's a really
that
good point for our audience to just remember. There is no right to abortion in the U.S. Constitution, but abortion activists like to argue that there is.
That's right.
Well, and he gives, a basis for the time period leading up to Roe, and it's a really fantastic chronology of the history and the common law, and it really explains how society was operating under principles of universal morality, which Moses and I addressed and talked about in our season 1 podcast, that life is of value and worth protecting. And what a novel concept that most people in society actually held to that, and that's what laws and society rallied around. Like that was the undergirth of all of the laws regulating abortion at that time. He also says that leading up to Roe and before there was this challenge, there was really only a desire to legitimize abortion in a few states. He says a right to abortion, again, with the idea I brought up earlier, is not deeply rooted in the nation's history and traditions. And the analysis that the court should have relied upon in Roe and even prior cases just didn't happen. And as you said, Grace, I think it's really important because I've had some sidewalk conversations already, just kind of listening, what is people's response? What do they think about Roe? And again, they really don't understand these constitutional principles. And I think that if people did understand that, they would be equally angry that the court inserted itself and basically became the legislative branch and then, is enforcing a federal law upon everybody when in fact they never had a right to do that in the first place.
And what is in the Constitution, what rights are in the Constitution is the right to life, which is another thing that I think our audience just needs to constantly remember that is enshrined by our Constitution. So whenever progressives come at you and start saying there's a right to abortion in the Constitution, you can say absolutely not, but there is a right to
explicitly.
Life. Explicitly, yep.
And but one other quote that I really liked from the opinion is the reference to the prior decisions and when The opinion states, we must exercise the most care lest the liberty protected by the Due Process Clause be subtly transformed into the policy preferences of this court. And I know a lot of the clamor is that that's exactly what's happening here, but it's not. It's actually making sure that that never happens again. And again, a correct understanding of the Constitution would provide people with that understanding, and they would know that Roe did exactly what they're saying Dobbs is doing now.
That's a good point. That's a really good point.
So he also goes on to talk about precedent. So I kind of look at this in like sections. So first there's kind of a treatise, and I like Justice Alito for that. I always feel like you get the litany of history in his opinions. And again, I think it's friendly to the lay audience. So if you feel like you don't understand the Constitution, haven't looked into substantive due process, take a read because you might learn something. And I think
I found it. I mean, I know very little about the law, but I was just so enjoying reading it.
Yeah, and I don't think obviously the topic's really exciting, but I just found it to be really interesting. This catalog of why abortion was never celebrated and never should have been in the first place. And again, it's just a moral atrocity. But he goes on to talk about precedent, and as we know, that's significantly important to this case. And specifically in his analysis of stare decisis. And stare decisis is just the doctrine that the court will stand by its decisions. And we want the court to stand by its decisions. We don't want, decisions to be overturned on a whim. And so he makes clear that that is not what's happening here. And he gives legal analysis about why this is Roe was such a monumental decision, and why it was incorrect, but why it is actually, appropriate to overturn Roe and cases following like Casey at this time. He basically says, nothing says that you can't overturn precedent, but he speaks to how that's done and how it is rightly overruled. So a significant quote in the opinion related to that would be when Justice Alito says, it has been said that it is sometimes more important that an issue be settled than it be settled right. But when it comes to the interpretation of the Constitution, the great charter of our liberties, which was meant to endure through a long lapse of ages, we place a high value on having the matter settled right. And again, he's just giving this emphasis that Roe was not settled right. It wasn't analyzed right, it wasn't approached right, and it wasn't settled right. And so we have a history of a few cases like that have been overturned. And Roe, if things go the way this majority opinion indicates, would be another one of those opinions, and that's the right thing for the court to do. Also, Grace, I think you mentioned this, but people have been really upset. They've also taken this to mean that this means that every settled decision or monumental decision like Obergefell, which dealt with same-sex marriage, and others, would now be overturned. And he kind of nips that and says, this is explicitly about abortion. I'm not talking about other things. So these all alarms need to just be settled down with the sentence that's in this opinion.
I think that it's, excuse me.
You're good.
I think it's really, like you mentioned, other cases that the court has overturned. And one thing that is it Plessy v. Ferguson, the one that said segregation is great, separate but equal.
Right.
And that was the cause of so much injustice in our country. And finally, Brown v. Board of Education was the case that that overturned that.
Right.
I think. Okay, thank you. Because I'm
Our
really,
in-house attorney.
I really know so little. But so when the court recognizes past injustice, not just a past wrongly settled opinion, but the past injustice, and specifically when that injustice is also involves a poorly written Supreme Court opinion or a wrongly decided opinion,
and
then the court,
an incorrect analysis in getting to that opinion in that holding, that's a problem.
So it's not like the Supreme Court is just making its own rules. It's really that they're following their own rules. Would you say that?
Yeah, they are following their own rules. And then now in this stare decisis analysis, there's a couple of factors that the court looks at, but one of them is this workable? And what is the effect on the law? And so I'll get into that a little bit more, but with respect to those other cases, they do consider, what's going on, how we have passed this law, that maybe was upheld previously, but how is that playing out? What does that really look like? And, and I noted here, as I was, preparing to come in and share and chat with you guys, but abortion has been a significant issue. And it's, again, noted in the opinion that this hasn't solved any problems. In fact, it's made things more divisive. And Grace, I'm sure you have a catalog of the laws that have been passed, the atrocities against other human beings, but I look at, the fact that we've had to continue to pass laws like Prenatal Non-Discrimination Act or laws that protect children with Down syndrome. So if we want to talk about a slippery slope, it's what has happened since Roe. It's that Roe created this culture that embraces abortion and it's an easy out. And now we're scrambling because we have to protect kids with Down syndrome. We're scrambling because we have to protect children of a certain race or ethnicity from maybe being aborted simply because they are who God created them. They are being discriminated against because of their DNA. That is wrong.
Yeah.
Is that the type of law and the type of precedent that we want?
Is that the type of society we want to live in?
Right.
Yeah.
Not really. So, the stare decisis analysis gets into some of the, other factors and even the societal harm and the arguments about the impact that overturning Roe v. Wade would have on society. And again, keep saying Grace, but the woman in the room is you've often on the podcast talked about the myth that women need abortion and that it was a strong just something that a lot of people were raising prior to the argument in this time that we've been waiting for the opinion. And there was a brief submitted, an amicus brief submitted in this case by, I think, over 200 women. They're all professionals, have to be of higher degrees, doctors, lawyers, psychologists, even governors signed on to this brief, actually written, co-authored, or co-counseled by our own Teresa Collette, the University of St. Thomas.
Wow.
Who also co-authored with me. This lady was a busy woman, but that brief was actually cited in the opinion.
That's so cool.
Because it showed, from women of all walks of life, both conservative and you might say even progressive women, that say we do not need abortion to be successful. And if you think that's true, that's a myth.
And it's sexist, honestly.
Right. Right. And what has abortion done for us? I mean, if it was really the answer to our problems, why don't why doesn't the Pregnancy Non-Discrimination Act actually stop pregnancy discrimination? It doesn't. Since that was passed, there's a multitude of cases about pregnancy discrimination. And that's all points us back to the fact that abortion is not the great rescuer that it proposes to be and that progressives say that it is.
That's a frightening thing, really, when you think about it. Like, I sometimes feel that when you're making an argument and your arguments are really weak, that you claim more because you're on such weak ground, like claiming that abortion is in the Constitution. That's an absurdity, really. Right. And that's the initial Roe v. Wade decision, but yeah, claiming that abortion does not harm the rights of, for example, people with Down syndrome and people who might be discriminated against in the womb for a disability or whatever. I just think that's just such thin ice because we see it happening. And so what you're saying is that essentially the court kind of has ignored that in its abortion jurisprudence, and now this opinion, if it became the basis of the final decision, would kind of rectify that.
Yeah, I think it brought that to life, and it's actually one of the reasons to persuade the overruling of this opinion.
And in addition to that, too, Renee, I think you've done a really good job emphasizing that women just don't need abortion, right? They just don't. Yesterday, I tweeted out, or was this 2 days ago? It was 2 days ago. I tweeted, the happiness of women cannot be bought by the blood of our children. Our culture needs to stop seeing pregnancy as a parasitic and motherhood as the greatest hindrance. Our children are worthy of life and are not objects to be discarded. I'm ready for a post-Roe America. Are you?
Wow, that went viral.
Did not go viral.
Go Grace.
But I think that really gets to part of the heart of what you're saying of, yes, this hurts the most vulnerable, it hurts children, it hurts the disabled children, but also abortion really does hurt women. And until we have a culture wherein women are valued and our children are valued, we're not going to live in a morally just society.
Right. And you're going back to the idea that, Roe was kind of insular and didn't have any effect on society. Again, that's completely wrong. And that's the basis of the brief, pretty much, that we submitted in this case. We talk about the societal harms that abortion causes.
Let's talk a little bit more about that because I thought that was so cool because not only were you involved and not only was Professor Teresa Collette, who's nationally known as one of the experts on the constitutional law regarding life, but also Vice President Mike Pence's organization. So can you talk a little bit about how that came about? And then also, I think we would love to hear some of the arguments of the brief and whether you think Justice Alito maybe echoed some of that.
Sure. We partnered with, again, University of St. Thomas, Teresa Collette, True North Legal, and also Advancing American Freedom, which is Vice President Mike Pence's new policy organization, to submit this amicus brief in Dobbs. And we did discuss the relationship between abortion and the societal impact of abortion and the harms that it's caused. We addressed 5 different areas in the brief of harm. I think one of the most notable and really wrenching areas of harm that we talked about would be the destruction of parental rights and the way that abortion really separates children from their parents when they probably need them most. I mean, young girls that are having an abortion don't need to be abandoned and don't need to have the court help put a chasm between parents when they need their parents. But in fact, children who want to have an abortion, or young girls, can get a judicial bypass.
Which is really common in Minnesota.
So if a young woman thinks that she needs to get an abortion, and let's say she was raped, she could and again, another issue we talked about in the brief was violence and domestic partner abuse and the correlation between abortion and that type of abuse. So a woman could be coerced, or a young woman especially, to get an abortion if she was raped, especially by an older man, which we talk about statistically in our brief is unfortunately quite common. And so here she is suffering 2 of those tragedies, and then she's going to have to deal with the fact that she made a decision, or that's at least how she'll feel, to get an abortion and then live with, we talk about in the brief, the mental health consequences of that. Women are just distraught from the choice to have an abortion. The statistics say, as much as 10 years after, but that's just people that have been willing to talk, and that's just a general study. I think that the consequences last a lifetime. How could you ever feel okay about the fact that you chose to kill your own child? And that's a horrible position to put young women in. But when you give them, when society creates, again, this disconnect between parents and the responsibility and role they have with their children, then those types of things happen.
So I think a lot of times we hear, that's really good, Renee. Thank you so much for sharing. A lot of times we hear from progressives that abortion is a really hard decision.
Right.
They say that a lot. But I think we need to ask, why is it such a hard decision? It's a hard decision because there's an innocent life at stake, and also because these decisions that women make greatly impact them.
They do.
Significantly.
Right.
Everything you just said. I mean,
they're biologically connected to this unique individual, the way that God has designed us, and we just can't ignore that. Yeah. And so the statistics of literally the reactions that women have, as we note in the brief, we give a list of mental health considerations that have been studied, and the correlation between abortions and then this mental health crisis, especially for women. I mean, there's things like infant phobia and depression for years and years later, and lots of other things. Some women just don't even want to live with themselves.
Yes.
And so I think what we need to do is we need to think about how we can, if this decision and if this draft opinion is, a reflection of what the majority opinion is going to be, we need to be forward thinking about how we can equip the church and help others to rally around people that are so fearful of this quote unquote right that's being taken away from them. Because I think we understand the truth, and again, the statistics are telling that they already are in harm's way.
Yes.
They think they're going to be in harm's way without abortion, but it's actually better for society and for women if they're cared for. And I'm not saying that being pregnant is easy, and that I'm not discrediting any of the circumstances that happen around pregnancy, including rape. No one ever wants to see anything like that happen. But the bigger picture, when we truly understand that this is a human life, changes. But we have to be ready to support people that are really fearful of what might happen.
Absolutely. I think it's a really good point. I mean, a post-Roe America and a post-Roe Minnesota would be good not only for children. Of course it would be good for children, but it would absolutely be good for women. And we need to make sure that they know that. And that's exactly what you're saying. We need to make sure every woman knows that she does not stand alone. That pregnancy resource centers stand with her,
right.
The church stands with her. And I think that's a really good point about the church too, is oftentimes in the pulpit, abortion is not discussed It's discussed once a year on Sanctity of Human Life Sunday. That is not enough. It's honestly outrageous that we talk about it that little.
Right.
It needs to be talked about so much more. I would love to come to your church, Renee. We need to talk about it more. I'm sick of, I'll talk about this more after in the next part of this podcast, but I'm sick of Christians virtue signaling about the trendy issues and not this issue. I'm sick of that. Why do you care so much about the trendy social justice issues, but not this one? That's something to think about.
So I feel like I didn't mean to take us on the little rabbit trail, but I'll come back with going back to the opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So we're in this analysis of why is it proper to overrule this case at this time?
Yes.
Going through about five different reasons why that the court looks to when they're going to do something like this, and then essentially concluding with this is the right thing to do. And overall, I mean, it was astounding. I couldn't believe I was reading this. I think, if you want to just flip to, I think it's like page 66. But it says, overall, Roe and Casey should have never been, and they've only created division. There's circuit splits all over the country about how to even handle abortion jurisprudence. We don't want to be the arbiters of this. It should be with the people. Roe and Casey should be overturned. It's like, wow.
Mm-hmm. The fireworks going off.
I mean, it's one thing for those of us who've been engaged in is to think about it, to prepare ourselves for it, but to actually see something like that. I know this is a draft, and I want to emphasize this is a draft, but to even see that in draft form. And you know what? If it doesn't go the way that we hope and pray, we are so much closer than we were even before this.
Absolutely.
And I don't think that we let our guard down, and I don't think that we let our efforts down. We keep going forward to a post-Roe America. I've never lived in that. I would love to live in that. I would love to raise my children in a society that embraces life. I would like them to be out of this culture of death that permeates everything. Even like we mentioned, the opinion mentions the women's brief, and that's something that the marketplace is going to have to wrestle with. Why have they built a marketplace specifically about pregnancy based on the easy out, abortion? Mm-hmm. Why haven't we done the work to promote families and acknowledge that women can be moms and women can be great professionals, and it is their personal choice about how that works out in their life?
I think, was it in the brief that you submitted with Professor Collette, the reference to women being coerced into getting an abortion by their employers?
Mm-hmm. Essentially, that's what happens when the marketplace doesn't recognize pregnancy or celebrate pregnancy and celebrate life. There is this undercurrent of feeling maybe, that I only have two choices. I either abort and keep my job, or I have my baby and I lose everything I've worked for. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of the narrative that we need to, that we have. That's the belief in some places of employment. And other places have started to recognize that women are a valuable asset to the workplace, and because biology and their just inner groanings dictate that they also want to be moms. And so what does that look like? I know a lot of young women ask me, how do you do it? I can't say it's perfect, and I can't say there's any formula or method for any mother or any family. I'm certainly blessed to be in the position that I'm in, and feel like I have a specific calling, not only in my legal life, but also as a mom. So, I can relate to that tension, and I hope and pray that the marketplace understands that they're losing 50% of the population when they think that abortion is the only way out. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Children or no children, and that's it.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Renee, I have to say it's really inspiring just watching you and getting to know you.
I think it's chaos.
It's inspiring.
You can call it inspiring.
It is an inspiration to work with a woman like this, like Renee Carlson, who has done so much for women and children. Just so incredibly much. Thank you, Renee, for your work, but also has an amazing, amazing family. I know her children. They are just wonderful, and she's done a wonderful job raising them. So
they're just as excited about this.
Renee is living proof that women can do both. They don't have to choose between a career and raising children. It's also so true that women can choose to stay home and have children. Doesn't make them lesser by any means. Women can choose to do that as well.
I think you need to know that God gives seasons in your life. Mm-hmm. And I've had different seasons. You noted a little bit of my bio. Some seasons were busier than others. And, with the support of my husband and just seeking the Lord in all of our decisions, we constantly reevaluate. Is this the right thing for our family? But I'm very humbled to have been a part of Dobbs, as far as, just the broader scope of things, to have contributed to something so monumental. And I just hope and pray that this opinion, or, something very close to it, is the final decision that we see. But as you have been talking about, again, in the podcast last season and this season, if Roe v. Wade is overturned, it is not over for Minnesota.
Right.
Because we have the Doe v. Gomez case, which essentially interpreted our state constitution to provide a fundamental right to abortion. So in Minnesota, what will happen if Roe v. Wade is overturned? Not much different. I mean, we have one of the most, our state is very egregious, and abortion is significantly protected by the current status of the law in Minnesota. So we will have a lot of work in front of us ahead.
So that's a really interesting point. Now, I think that so we have our own little mini Roe v. Wade, you could call it.
Right.
And we need to
the effect of that.
The effect of it, yeah. So we need to work for it in various ways. I have to say that the one thing that and of course I saw that Planned Parenthood in Minnesota and the abortion doctors in Minnesota are all talking about abortion is still going to be legal whatever happens in Minnesota, and what does that mean? I just want to turn off the TV.
If it's not legal in other states, but it is legal in Minnesota,
right?
Wow, we are going to be the mecca for abortion, or
Yeah.
at least one of those states.
Yeah.
So we need to
That
be
was
ready
something
for that.
when I was getting calls from news organizations earlier this week about this.
And we'll talk more about that later in this episode.
Yeah,
Sure.
and that was something that I said to them. I don't think Minnesotans want our state to be a mecca for abortion. I hope that fact, but also just the changing atmosphere on this topic. Hopefully from the overturning of Roe v. Wade, would also just inspire pro-lifers to take action so that our state is no longer egregious,
Right.
as you say, in terms of what we allow and how long we allow abortion for, and all the ways in which Minnesota is getting this issue wrong right now.
Right. It's when you mentioning the doctors, it just kind of triggered in my mind thinking about this opinion and even oral arguments and the discussions about how our technology and medical technology has changed so much. So, even at the time of Roe, an ultrasound looked very different at 23, 24 weeks than it does now. I mean, even an ultrasound at 15 weeks is much more detailed now than it was at the time of Roe, so nearly 50 years ago. So I think even medical technology is forced to acknowledge that when they see this image of, some glob of cells together, wow, that's actually a human being. We can detect fetal heartbeat. We know that infants feel pain. And those are things in the footnotes of this opinion that were referenced that, things have drastically changed. And some of our reasoning for certain beliefs when Roe was decided are not our beliefs now. You just cannot deny that, at least at an earlier point, which is kind of what Mississippi, set at their 15-week ban, that's pretty obvious that that's a human. I mean, we would hold to other things here at MFC, but for sure, you can't deny that little heartbeat in there
right.
is something else.
It is. I think that's absolutely. I think that's the direction which I hope all 50 states will be going in eventually. I want to talk, Renee, also, because this isn't the only thing you've been doing. You helped write this brief, which I think materially contributed to what the Supreme Court is currently deciding.
It absolutely
did. But you're also working here
so.
at the legislature, assisting our Assistant Director of Public Policy and helping legislators understand the importance of some of the issues that we're fighting for. We'll be talking to our Assistant Director of Public Policy in a moment. But what has stood out for you this session? What have been some of the highlights and lowlights, if that's the way to put it?
Highlights and lowlights. High, low, buffalo. Okay, that's what we say in my family. All right. So I think that one of the most significant issues that True North has engaged in is an issue of parental rights. Early on in session, the Senate held a hearing with a couple pieces of legislation that would bolster parental rights, some more in the educational sphere with curriculum, and one specifically that would just make parental rights a fundamental right in the state of Minnesota. I am really excited about that type of legislation, and I was very thankful to be able to testify and to submit our opinions on why that why parental rights should be fundamental rights. So we'll see what happens as the bills come together, various omnibus bills coming together, and how this all shakes out. But that has been a priority, at least in the Senate. And we think that should be a priority in the years ahead if nothing happens with that this year. But we are definitely excited to provide legal analysis on why that matters in Minnesota. We've also been involved in battling the so-called conversion therapy bans for, I don't know, the 4th year now. I did it as a volunteer. You asked about some of my experience.
Oh, yeah.
So I was volunteering on that issue, and then when I came on staff, I continued to engage in that. But really, any legislation that is called a conversion therapy ban is essentially just a counseling ban. It is a ban on speech, and the Supreme Court has signaled that that is not legislation that would be upheld. So they haven't explicitly decided that, but they have signaled in their discussion and other opinions that that's just not the way states should go. And that's what we think. We think that everybody should have the freedom to seek the counseling and care that they deserve, and we think it's actually cruel to tell children that they cannot get help with the therapist of their choosing, that they cannot access therapists for talk therapy, but that they can change their gender by going through gender transition and essentially sterilizing themselves at 13.
And have it being kept secret from parents because, as you point out, parental rights need to be strengthened in law, and school districts have these policies where this is happening completely secretly.
They could
and it's totally fine for minors to do that.
Right. I mean, I saw this, libs of TikTok, I got to bring it up.
Oh,
but there is a video that just astounded me where there's these gender closets, and the administration says, okay, so we have
I'm
this
just going to say I don't like the sound of that.
Yes, it is. So you come to school, they say you can come to school, you dress the way you dress what you normally do at home. But when you come here, you put on new clothes that your parents don't know about. Then when you go home, you change back into your clothes. I mean,
it doesn't get crazier than that.
So
honestly.
there's that. So that's kind of the marriage of parental rights and gender. But overall, again, the counseling bans are really an issue of free speech. It's pretty easy, and we're just appalled that we have to keep battling this.
Right.
But we hope that common sense prevails on that issue. And then we've also been engaged in some defensive, I will say, strategies with respect to religious freedom and some exemptions within our Minnesota Human Rights Act. There's been an attempt to take out those exemptions, and so we strongly oppose that and have encouraged and provided legal analysis so that that doesn't happen.
It seems to me like, and the reason that we're doing these things, getting involved in some of these issues which are never going to make the headlines, some of these things.
Right.
And it's because, our organization is devoted to some of the fundamental rights that are guaranteed in our Constitution, state and federal, life and religious freedom, the right to life, the right to religious freedom, and also the fundamental concept, which is recognized in common law, but mostly we're talking about the biblical principle of the family,
right,
and of the authority of parents under God to raise their children, to train them up in the way they should go, and that the state and the schools they're not in loco parentis. And so I'm just so glad, Renee, that you are at the Capitol and that you're at the courthouse fighting for these issues with the True North Legal Initiative. And if anybody wants to learn more about True North Legal, you can learn more about Renee's work and even confidentially request legal assistance at truenorthlegal.org. So
on the screen and in the description.
On the screen and in the description.
Yep.
So, Renee, thank you so much for being here today. When we come back, we'll be with our Assistant Policy Director, Rebecca Delahunt. Thank you so much for continuing to watch The Family Beacon. Guys, we told you it was going to be a blockbuster podcast, and now here we are back for our third segment with our second guest of the day, who is our Assistant Director of Public Policy, Rebecca Delahunt. Becca, thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for your work at the Capitol. I said when you walked in that it's been like a long time since I've seen you in the office because you have been so busy at the Capitol, and that just that dedication and just it's not a 9 to 5, is it? You probably knew that when you came on board in January, but it seems like it's such an unpredictable job, and it just seems like you're killing it.
Thank you so much.
And I'm not the only one that feels that way.
You're definitely killing it, Becca. Yeah. Yeah, you are much appreciated.
Thank you. Oh my goodness! Wow, I should just come on here for like the encouragement. I feel like
yeah, we
said
said we hype people up. We want people
do.
to feel welcome and awesome.
Yeah. So Becca, I have to say I live for your little daily policy updates. I love getting the updates of what's going on. I've heard some rumors floating around recently. Why has there been so much talk about nothing getting done, so to speak, at the Capitol? Is that actually accurate? I've heard that from a lot of different sources.
Yeah, you see that a lot in local Minnesota news. You'll hear nothing's getting done, or you'll hear that from the leaders. So Minnesota's political landscape is unique in the country in that we have a split legislature. So the Democratic Farmer Labor Party controls the House of Representatives, while the Republican Party controls the Senate. So they have the majority of the seats. And I believe that we are only one of 3 states who has a situation like that. And so, so there's a lot of negotiating going on. There's a lot of disagreement, a lot of back and forth. And so things have definitely slowed down. But things are getting done at the Capitol. And we're continuing to hold the line on our issues. So really excited to share some of the most exciting things from my end today.
Yeah. So earlier this year, when you came on the podcast for the first time, when we did our special episode of the Capitol, which I enjoyed, and I want to do that more because I just love going to the Capitol. It's it's the people's house. I am one of the people. I should be able to film there whenever I want.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
The security guards may not agree.
Moses is the first person. I'm pretty sure Moses is the first person.
The first person? Well, I don't know about that. I would say that my little babies are the first people.
There you go.
They're the most important to me personally. So earlier this year, you came on. We talked about MFC's priorities. We talked about the priorities of the GOP and the DFL. Can you give us an update on some of the issues, of some of the main issues that you've been working on, and also just what are the different parties? What are they squabbling about? What are they trying to get done?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll speak to a couple of the issues, and then I know the hot issue right now is life, so we can come back to. I'll share what happened recently this week on life. So we chatted in January when the legislature was first beginning, and I think I told you about the Equal Rights Amendment, the so-called Equal Rights Amendment.
Yeah.
And it did come up. We had several hearings in the House of Representatives. And the ERA is an issue that's been brought up federally and in state legislatures for decades now with different kinds of language. And the language this year in the House is that there shall be no discrimination on the basis of gender, which at first glance sounds great. I mean, I don't want anybody to be discriminated against. But the issue with this particular policy is that there's no definition of gender. And so...
Because it's a made-up word.
Because it's a made-up word. And
I mean, it was never... I'm sorry. I'm going to get on my soapbox for 1 second.
Take your soapbox.
Gender is for words. Sex is for people. That is to say, there's male and female. That's sex. Gender, masculine, feminine, and neuter. That was always for language. And I think it was actually like some crazy French guy, like... Foucault, maybe, who was Derrida, who was like, no, we are going to use this word to describe humans. It will help us to overcome the patriarchy.
That's a pretty good accent.
Anyway, I'm so sorry. I'm being so distracting.
Yeah, we gotta.
The point is, gender is not defined in the law, right?
Yeah.
So that makes it problematic.
So they do not define it in the particular bill that's been coming up, and so. The issue is that a person can take on any identity at will. So a male can say, I'm a woman today, and he can walk into, a recovery women's abuse shelter and do a lot of harm there, which is really concerning. And I find it so ironic that in today's day and age, the Minnesota legislature is drafting bills that subvert the rights of protection of women for the predation of males.
That is a little ironic.
It's very ironic. And so... At MFC, we want to stand for the protection of women. We value women. We want to support the safety of women. And so I've been really happy to take the stance of standing against this so-called Equal Rights Amendment, which really is no equal rights whatsoever. So,
The short version of that is that we're for the rights of women and the safety of women, and anybody who disagrees with us, well, you better ask them where their stance is.
Check your motives here.
And I'm joking a little bit, but seriously,
I know.
Men and women's bathrooms,
Yep.
men and women's sports teams.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, the results of this, I mean, it could be that a male could get on a women's sports team, take away women's records, which would be crazy. We've never seen that before.
Have we ever seen that before? No.
Have I seen that? I don't think I saw that.
We could even see a guy become the first female admiral in the public health service.
Can you imagine if that would be the
honestly,
case?
but
No, it sounds too crazy.
Yeah.
If we could
No
go
one
back
would get
10
behind
years
it.
and if we could all go back 10 years and like when we were all probably still at home with our parents and say, "Hey, Mom and Dad, did you know that this is going to happen in 10
Yeah.
years?" We think we'd be laughed out of the
I
house.
would say absolutely not. It's crazy. Yeah, absolutely crazy the past couple of years. Speaking of the past couple of years, the other thing I wanted to talk about, and I know Renee mentioned this when she was on, we really want to protect the right of children to seek therapy. So if we've learned anything since the start of the pandemic, it's that Gen Z minors are really struggling with anxiety and depression and sexual identity. And there is a contingent of legislators who want to outlaw therapy that helps minors who are struggling with sexual identity. And we just fully take a stance against that. I mean, the government can't come up to a contingent of young people and say, you're struggling with depression, you're struggling with gender identity, you don't have access to social sciences. You're going to be cut off from therapists because you do not fit with our agenda. If you fit with our agenda, sure, you can see all the therapists you want. But if you don't fit with the agenda, you can stay in that confusion, you can stay in your dysphoria, or you're welcome to get puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and sex change surgery, which is just incredible. It's incredible that we're dealing with that. You can't talk to a therapist. That's torture, but you can go right to surgery. So we stand for the right of patients to seek the therapy that they want. We stand for, like Renee said, we stand for the First Amendment rights of patients to seek that therapy and for therapists to help them reach their own goals. And we also stand for parental rights to help guide their children in making decisions that could leave them scarred for life that they don't understand when they're making them.
Right.
So that one's really personal to me. I really, especially with all the people that I know my age who are struggling with all of these different mental health issues. I want to take a firm stance for that. So those are the issues, but I know, I'm sure we want to get to the life issue.
Yeah.
That's kind of the hot thing this week. So and we had some things happen at the Capitol. So
yeah, I know recently, sometime this week, you slacked me and you were telling me about an amendment that was actually offered on the House floor, and it seemed to be life-friendly. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So this week, the House heard its Health and Human Services Omnibus Bill. I think it was like 800 and something pages. It was just like a huge
bit of light reading.
Stack.
Yikes.
Light reading. I read it all the night before.
Of course, yeah.
I read everything.
Wow. So, Becca, Tuesday, I got a Slack message from you, and you were telling me about an amendment that was offered up on the House floor that seemed to be life-friendly. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So on Tuesday, the House heard its Omnibus Health and Human Services Bill, and Representative DeMuth from Cold Spring offered an amendment that would allow state grant family planning money to only go to organizations that don't refer or advocate for abortion.
That seems commonsensical.
Yeah, it seems very commonsensical. Supports mothers, supports the babies when they're born, and her amendment did not pass.
Let me guess. There was some controversy.
There was some controversy. You should actually go back and watch it. It was actually very fascinating.
Okay.
I'm not going to go into the details, but it's very dramatic. Ultimately, her amendment did not pass, but I wanted to show how contentious it was and how there was bipartisan support for upholding the dignity of life and mothers who want to go through with having their babies. So the Speaker of the House ruled the amendment out of order, and he claimed that the content of her amendment was different from the content of the 800 and something omnibus bill. She made a very, very valid argument that it was germane to the content of the omnibus bill, and his ruling was challenged. And so when the Speaker's ruling is challenged, members can take a vote on do we keep the speaker's ruling? Do we overturn it? And when they tallied the votes, they came to 66 to 66.
Oh, wow.
And there was actually bipartisan votes to overturn the ruling of the speaker.
Wow, so close.
So close. And actually, I was sitting there listening in, and I was actually super encouraged. So for all of you watching at home, and for me too, I feel like we often assume that our legislature is pro-murder of the unborn. But that's just not the case. There's actually bipartisan support for helping women who decide that they want to keep their babies. They just need some financial support or some emotional support or educational resources to be able to do that. So I feel like we should all be encouraged, and this is a great thing to pray for, especially as we go into the next session.
Yeah.
Yeah, so be encouraged.
That's
Thank you,
that's
Becca.
awesome.
Yeah.
So you're doing such great work. When does the session actually end?
Yes, the session
And you can
ends
have your life back.
May 23rd. Yeah, the session ends May 23rd.
Wow.
So I don't know, is that 2.5 weeks? What is that?
Crazy.
Yeah, it's coming up.
Yeah.
So here's my final funnish question for you.
Yeah.
What are you going to do this summer when you don't have to be at the Capitol every day?
I feel like I had the same answer for you before, but when I don't have to be at the Capitol, I'm going to be playing soccer.
Sounds fun.
Also, I have a gazillion weddings this year.
Oh, okay.
I'm not
Wow.
I'm not in all of them. I'm in I'm just in one, I think. But I have so many weddings, so I think I'm going to be celebrating with friends,
Fun.
celebrating with family, and trying to enjoy these couple months of weather, I think.
Now that it's
I
finally
love to see it.
about to be
Now that it
summer
is
in
spring.
Minnesota.
It's like
Yeah.
finally spring weather. It's been so cold for so long. It's been so bad.
We
Yeah.
won't talk about the weather because we all have Stockholm syndrome.
Let's just be good Minnesotans
being
and talk about the weather.
Exactly. I just want to say thank you so much, Becca, for
Yes,
being
thank you,
here.
Becca.
And we're so grateful that Renee was here earlier in the show. Grace and I want to continue bringing on guests from here at MFC and from across the state who help us cover the issues life, family, and religious freedom so that you can get the facts and stand for truth here at the Family Beacon podcast. Thank you so much for watching.
Thanks for listening to or watching this episode of the Family Beacon podcast from Minnesota Family Council. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you're up to date on life, family, and religious freedom. You can follow us on Instagram at MN Family Council and subscribe to us on YouTube to watch our content. Get the facts, stand for truth.